Amid escalating trade tensions, the transatlantic alliance faces its toughest test yet. The EU's strong but proportionate retaliatory tariffs on the US imports signals a firm response to Washington's lingering 25% steel and aluminium levies, originally imposed under President Trump. With Belgium, a key European steel hub, witnessing a staggering 15% drop in imports, fears of economic fallout loom large. As global markets brace for renewed protectionism, can diplomacy prevail, or are we witnessing a new dawn of a new era in US-EU relations? I'm Ram Morsi, and welcome to Think Tank.
Our world is becoming unhinged.
The New York Times has reported that President Trump's new wave of tariffs targets imports from Canada, Mexico, and China, aiming to protect US industries and address trade imbalances. Dubbed reciprocal tariffs, they match levies imposed by other nations, disrupting decades of free trade. Economists warn American consumers will bear the brunt, with higher prices in cars, groceries, and electronics. The EU, Canada, and China have retaliated, escalating global tensions, while Trump argues these measures boost domestic manufacturing and revenue. Critics say they risk shrinking tax income and increasing consumer costs. Industries reliant on imports face uncertainty. Globally, allies and rivals alike push back, straining diplomatic ties. As markets waver, fears grow that these bold protectionist strategies may deepen economic instability rather than fortify America's standing. According to The Guardian, President Trump's latest tariffs, dubbed Liberation Day, aim to reshape global trade by imposing levies on imports, sparking fears of economic volatility. While the US seeks to boost domestic industries, trade partners like the UK, EU, and Canada are bracing for impact, with some attempting carve-outs and others retaliating. Markets are jittery, with global stocks down 4.5% in March as businesses delay spending and uncertainty. Consumers may soon feel the pinch, with potential price hikes and projected 1% GDP hit for the UK in a worst-case scenario. Amid shifting supply chains and friendshoring strategies, the world faces a fragile new era of protectionism. As tensions resurface between the European Union and the United States, the impact is being felt far beyond political corridors, reaching factory floors and workers' lives. In Belgium, a sharp cut in steel imports is stirring protests and prompting urgent action from Brussels. Here's our report on the rising strain in the steel battle trade.
Once a vital gateway for Europe's steel imports, Belgium is now pulling back, slashing its intake by 15%. Behind the numbers lies a deeper story: the return of trade tensions between the European Union and the United States, stirred once again by the shadow of Trump-era tariffs. It began with a familiar move: Washington reasserting its 25% tariffs on steel and aluminum. For Europe, this was not just about lost exports. It signaled a flood of cheap steel being diverted from the US market, threatening to swamp European producers already struggling with high energy costs and aging competition. In response, the European Commission moved swiftly, tightening its safeguard measures, lowering import quotas, and cutting the liberalization rate to nearly zero. The goal? Defend Europe's steel backbone before it buckles. But on the ground, pressure is mounting. In Belgium alone, 12,000 steel jobs were lost last year. Across the continent, factories are running at just 60% capacity. In Brussels, thousands of steel workers marched, energy, anxious, and demanding action. They spoke not just of jobs, but of dignity and of being left behind. Brussels is listening, while still calling for dialogue. EU leaders are now weighing retaliatory tariffs. Their message is clear. Europe won't stand idle. As the standoff deepens, this is not just a trade dispute. It is a test of how far nations will go to protect what they make and who they employ.
To provide more analysis about the most recent US tariffs towards Europe and their relations, joining us from Washington is Dr. Hussein Al-Khatib, a political science professor, and from Paris, Mr. Meher Nicholas Ferzili, a World Bank former advisor and director of the Washington Forum. Thank you both for joining us here on Think Tank. Let's start off with Dr. Al-Khatib. With President Trump's reciprocal tariffs reshaping global trade, how do you assess their impact on the US-EU strategic alliance amid the escalating economic tensions?
Thank you for inviting me. The relationship between the EU and the US, between Europeans and the US, is deeper than the economic relationship. It's bigger than one person. Now what Trump is doing is engaged in an experiment. He is tinkering with a system that has been around for a long time. But the complaints about the system have also been old. Many times over the years, there have been complaints about the Europeans not being fair to the US. But the issue was that they're our friends and they're important, and especially during the Cold War. The issue was that they are the allies, and you have to basically put up with them. Now, what Trump is doing is shaking things up, and this is a period that's going to be high in unpredictable outcomes. We don't know how it's going to play out, but I can guarantee you this, that Americans have always complained about the Europeans not being fair to American industry, how the imbalance in trade is not good. There's imbalance with China, and there is imbalance as well. So there is this issue, and the Europeans can't really disengage from the US because the US relationship is deeper than just the trade aspect. There are the markets. It's a huge market, Europe for the US, and the US is a huge market for the Europeans. And there is a military aspect as well. Therefore, I don't think that there's going to be damage to the relationship that's lasting and will lead to a rupture, but I think it will affect it for sure.
Okay, Mr. Ferzili, considering the EU's strong but proportionate retaliatory tariffs, how significant is this move in signaling a new era of assertiveness against global protectionism led by the United States? You've heard Dr. Al-Khatib and how he said that this may be a transition era right now.
Yeah, I find myself in partial agreement with Dr. Al-Khatib. I think as much as a trade or commercial war, I think it is first and foremost an ideological war. It's a war of ideas. And why am I saying so? Because the Trump White House has been using symbolism and ideology as much as commercial retaliations. For example, President Trump called today's announcement, he used the term liberation, and of course the choice of word is not innocent because it's a reference to the Boston Tea Party, and after all, as a nation, America was born as a national movement, as a state, from a trade war between the colonists in Boston and the British capital, London. And the trade, the issue was about taxing tobacco and tea. Another word that Trump has been using is reciprocity or fairness. the difference between Trump and the previous presidents, be they George W. Bush on the right or Obama and Biden on the center left, is, the Bush, Cheney, Obama, Biden people were somehow complacent or happy, to allow Europe on the margin not to treat America completely fairly, and to trade with the Europeans, knowing that it wasn't full reciprocity, that there were some sectors, and what's very important, where the Union or France or Germany or Ireland were kind of, playing a protectionist game, but America was kind of complacent and happy about it. I think the big change is what Trump is doing today. And to make a long story short, it's happening in a broader context. So, we're focusing on Canada, Mexico, the European Union, the UK. I think the bigger story here is the techno-industrial rivalry between America and China. I think this is the major geopolitical financial issue of the next 60 or years. But American planners, and I think it goes deeper than Trump, because if it was only, a quote unquote lunatic, TV personality, blah, 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 and Trump is often described as a fringe character or not very rational, I think it wouldn't happen. It's happening because it goes Trump. There are policy planners in America, both within the Republican Party and amongst Democrats, called neo-realists, or we can call them, Roosevelt nationalists. And these T.R. Roosevelt neo-realists, Nixonians, both Republicans, centrists, and Democrats, they are on board and they support Trump. So it's not Trump alone, acting of his own volition. Somehow,
yes, I understand what you're trying to get at, that this policy is probably something that they should have enacted decades ago, but it should have been more of a transitional or a slow-paced sort of policy. Trump seems to be more aggressive with it. Do you not think that this may affect, the world economy as a whole? Are we facing a recession as a global economy?
Yeah, I think you're raising a very good strategic issue. So, I'm trying to be very cold and neutral here, and not look at things in a very cold, sort of strategic manner, right? And from that perspective, the problem, the mistake that Trump is making, he's fighting on multiple fronts at the same time. So he's fighting that trade war against China and Mexico and Canada, and the wise man would have proceeded more carefully and, like you said, more gradually. I think Trump is a man in a hurry and is doing things abruptly, some may say brutally, and I think he's going to focus on sectors. So, for example, obvious sector is U.S. beef, U.S. meat. The European Union, France, Germany, they've been using something called autonomous tariff quotas, and they've been saying, you in America, you guys use gross hormones, the beef and the chicken you sell us, they're full of antibiotics and hormones, it's not good, blah, blah, blah. We're going to slap on you quotas, quantitative measures. But honestly, these autonomous tariff quotas, they are additional tariffs that American exporters have to pay. Another example is the cultural sector. Today, the cultural sector, including television, movies, entertainment, is really huge. It's a big part of the economy. And what the Europeans are saying, like, for example, we need to protect French language, we need to protect French, whatever, literature, etc., or theater, and we will have additional taxes on American producers in Hollywood who are exporting cultural products. So if you add up all the exemptions and additions, it adds up to a lot. And I think because there's a slowdown of the economy, I think the Americans are saying, enough is enough. But they're doing it aggressively. You're right.
Okay, if we could also get Dr. Khatib's perspective. I'm sure you've heard Mr. Fazili's perspective here, that it's sort of targeted towards certain sectors. For instance, in Belgium, there's a 15% drop in the steel imports, and it has a ripple effect on European industries as a whole. Could there be a tipping point where protectionist policies may undermine, decades of transatlantic cooperation, or is this, as Mr. Fazili may have said, something that was necessary but shouldn't have been, as aggressive? It should have taken more of a gradual sort of thing.
I mean, you have a human being dealing with a problem. And now you can imagine the White House with a big sign in front of it. This place is under new management. He is abandoning them. Trump is making the conscious decision to abandon. No more business as usual. There's an American expression. There's a new sheriff in town. There is this economic huge trade deficit that this country has every year. A huge trade deficit, and the country has a huge debt. It's highly indebted, trillions of dollars, about $34-35 trillion. And looking into the competition with China that has country that has the economy, the population, and the gifted people that present a serious threat to U.S. Leadership of the world and hegemony. So here is that it's not just one problem, it's a trade problem with all these players. That's why he's dealing with them. He's trying to restructure. Now, everybody comes to the table and turn a new page and say, okay, this is how things have been done before. Now we're going to do things differently. Americans, if you talk to regular Americans, normal Americans, ordinary Americans, and Vance, J.D. Vance is one of them. He comes from Ohio. They call it flyover country because people, when they visit the country, you have New York and you have California, and in between, they call themselves forgotten Americans. There was this deindustrialization in this country. Deindustrialization, basically, all the trade has hurt people. There's some people who made money, but a lot of people hurt. Many towns got devastated by the change in the economy, and there's perception that everybody is taking advantage of the U.S., not just
Yes.
so-called adversaries or enemies, but our friends as well. And that's populism. It has resonance with Democrats and Republicans as well, as your guest correctly with his excellent analysis noted.
But Doctor, I mean,
So
you talked about the
that's
idea
why
of
you see the
changes.
changes.
You talked about the idea of changes in policies and how this could affect, the masses, and it affected people in the past in the U.S. Given these protectionist policies that are, as you said, across the board, globally, will this affect, the people living in the United States in the near negatively?
It is possible. It's an experiment. What you see that you'll have new management now. Things that were happening one way, now there's new management, new person, and he's a man in a hurry because he has 4 years, and 4 years will fly by. He has a chance to get things done because in the beginning the president is strong. As time passes, maybe in the midterm elections, the Republicans lose, and then he'll be in a weaker position. So he's in a hurry now to get his agenda enacted. And how it's going to play out, I mean, the economists are not optimistic generally. They say this is tinkering with a system that has been, run on autopilot for a long time, and now you're trying to shake things up. And yes, bad things could happen, but I think you have human beings dealing with a real problem, and it's possible have self-interest, rationality, and they have new arrangement that's beneficial to everyone. When he says reciprocity, it means I treat you the way you treat me. And I don't think that's a bad value. It's not unfair to do that. But everyone gets used to doing things a certain way, and when you come and change things up and change, yes, it's a big. You're playing with a huge economy, with huge markets. This is not like a limited. You're not like in a small town and trying to change things locally. This is globally, and as you said, correctly noted. I mean, it can't turn out to be a disaster, but it can turn a new chapter and doing things in a different way.
Okay, Mr. Fazili, going back to Europe, Belgium's steel industry has seen massive job losses and declining imports. How critical is this sector's plight in shaping, Brussels' response towards Washington and the lingering 25% levies on steel?
I find myself in agreement with a lot of what Dr. Khatib said, which is reassuring. And to answer your question, he has a point. I think the Belgian government has done a lot of work. They have been working on a lot of reforms. They have been working on a lot of reforms. They have been working on a lot of reforms. They have been working on a lot of reforms. And I think the Belgian government has done a lot of work. He here we could say that somehow, and I'm not trying to make a wordplay, the European Union is using the trump card because, to be honest, the macroeconomic data that governments publish, they come to us, experts or academics, with a 2-3 months time lag. So before Trump entered the White House, the Belgian and the French and the German economies were already in steep slowdown or decline. And look at the Belgian, for example, the Belgian steel industry. The main reason why there's a crisis in Belgium is because for many years, countries like India, for example, India or China, they have flooded Europe with cheap steel. And the Indians have even been allowed to take control aggressively of big steel plants in France, Belgium, Holland, and Britain. And when they bought on the cheap the steel mills, they promised European governments, don't worry, we the Indians are long-term investors, we're not firing anyone, we'll invest in modernizing the steel plants. They took tens of billions of subsidies paid by the governments of Belgium and France, for example, and they downsized the steel plants. So what I'm coming at is there was a crisis building up at the heart of European industry, had nothing to do with Trump, but it's true, and it's sad, that Trump is hitting them in a way when they are at their weakest. To come back to what Dr. Al-Khatib said, these states, Pennsylvania, Ohio, they're called the Rust Belt. And they're not called the Rust Belt by coincidence. It's because for 20, 30, 50 years, slowly, these industries have been declining in Middle America. And that's why many working class, many poor working class Democrat voters, they flocked to Trump in droves 4 months ago. Likewise, in Illinois and Michigan, they abandoned the Democrat Party. And so what Trump is telling them is, I'm listening to you. The geography of America, the economic geography of America is linked to the world trade, the world geopolitics. And if it takes, quote unquote, hurting Indian or Belgium, steel workers, quote unquote, to help the ones at home in Pennsylvania and Ohio, I will do it. That is Trump's gamble. It's a risky gamble, it's not easy, but it's the path he's following.
Okay, Dr. Al-Khatib, Washington, like you said, this is a gamble, or at least Dr. Fazili had said that. Washington's aggressive tariff stances, originally aimed at boosting the domestic industry, as you clearly said before, could possibly backfire. But also, there's a possibility of alienating, allies in Europe. I know you may not agree with me totally when I asked you this, but is this a possibility given the retaliatory measures and given, the geopolitical dynamics that are already happening in the EU due to the Ukraine-Russia war as well? There's tensions there, not just economically, but also on a political front.
Yeah, I don't think you'll see a breakdown just because of the trade, breakdown in the relations just because of the trade. Trade is only one component. There is the issue of the market. I mean, the European market is huge, important for the U.S. The American market is huge, important. There is relationship, economic relationship that goes beyond the trade imbalance. The restaurants, the industry, it's bigger than the trade imbalance, the economic relationship. And there is a military relationship, there is a cultural relationship. I don't think that you will have this relationship destroyed just because of the trade dispute. I mean, even though it's a big trade dispute.
But they could pull apart. I mean, it's the closeness that the EU and the Americans initially had historically may, sort of break down, even if slightly.
But that tells you something. They had it so good that they're unhappy with changing things. Anybody who's really loud changing things, that tells you how nice of a deal they had. That's why, I mean, it's understandable. They had it really good. And any change is not going to be to their old position that was really good. And that's understandable. I mean, if you have a partner that's having advantages and the relationship is skewed, when you try to rectify the relationship, they're not going to be happy with it. So that's understandable. But America is the indispensable country. And the Europeans don't have all the same. There are a number of states that are sovereign, and they have different positions on the U.S. Not all of them are France. France is always trying to distinguish the Europeans from the U.S., trying to be independent. But not all of them have the same position on the U.S. But all of them realize the importance of the United States as a partner and as a military protector. So the relationship is not going to be destroyed by the trade dispute. And you have 4 years of Trump in the White House. There's going to be another president. So I don't think that they will take a risk to destroy a relationship over what could be just a temporary situation.
Okay, I thank you both for joining us. This brings us to the end. That was Dr. Ihsan Al-Khatib, a political science professor, and Mr. Meher Nicholas Farzidi, a World Bank former advisor and director of Washington Forum. Thank you both for your insights, and thank you for joining us on Qnews. From steel tariffs to global supply chains, today's trade tensions test the reliance or either resilience of the US-EU ties. As protectionism rises, can diplomacy restore balance? These are questions that we'll be asking in future episodes. Thank you for watching. This brings us to the end of today's episode of Think Tank. And thank you for joining us. I'm Rehan Morsi, and stay tuned for more updates here on Qnews.